Hello, voters. This is Simone Boutet. Today, I'm moving on from my interview series with the congressional candidates, and I'm happy to be interviewing Fritz Kaegi, who's running for Cook County Assessor. Fritz is running for re-election. So, Fritz, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and why you decided to leave your career and decide to become a government worker to become the assessor?
Sure. I live in Oak Park right now, where I'm coming to you now. So we got to know each other as Oak Parkers. But I grew up on the South Side in Hyde Park, son of a professor, and my mom was a Peace Corps volunteer and active in the community. I went to Kenwood Academy on the South Side, and a lot of my friends and classmates, they were, when the housing crisis hit them, when they become homeowners, I started learning about how the property tax system was filled with a lot of inequities. Really, a lot of people were hit by the housing crisis. Their home values were going down. They were underwater on their mortgages, but in a lot of cases, their taxes were going up and they didn't understand why. And I didn't understand either. And so I started learning more about our system. And that's what I wanted to talk to everyone about today. I'd spent 2 decades as a global investor, investing people's savings, learning how to value different assets, including real estate. And what I saw our assessor's office doing, where they're supposed to be, estimating the market values of commercial buildings and homes, but the values that they were using were completely at variance what I knew big commercial buildings to be valued at. And I realized that there was a lot of inequity built into our assessment system, which is built into a larger inequitable property tax system. And I wanted to reform it. And I really thought that the bad damage that our office had done before through a pay-to-play system could be remedied by making it more transparent and fair and working on behalf of average homeowners. And I thought that would be a good use of the skills that I'd had. And I thought I wanted to step up to fix it. And so that's why I ran in 2018. And we beat the boss of the Chicago machine, and we've been reforming the office ever since. And so this has been a great journey. And Cook County is huge, It's not only the whole city of Chicago, but it includes a lot of the suburbs, including Oak Park, but it goes all the way northwest to Elgin, all the way up to the North Shore, to Lake Cook Road, and then all the way south down to Lansing and down almost to Farms. So it's quite diverse, and then Orland Park. So it's very diverse. It's huge. It's the second biggest county in the country. But the property taxes are really important for people's lives, for their well-being, and it's connected to many different units of government. So that's what we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this will be your third term. That's what you're seeking, a third term, is that right?
That's right. Seeking a
Yeah.
third term. Really, this is part of the arc of progress for how you fix a broken system. And
Yeah.
the third term, we're really excited about what's ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start by educating people because it's very common that people think that their assessment is they don't understand the difference between the tax levy and the tax assessment and how it all
Mhm.
works, right? So I think
Yeah.
it's important for people to understand what you do and differentiate that from the work of municipalities in levying an amount that they want to collect.
Right. Property taxes are confusing, right? And then we have the
Yes.
Blues Brothers thrown into it where it's called the tax assessor and they're paying the bill there, which, confuse things a little bit too. So the basic thing to understand is that the way our property tax system works, and it is very complex, but the basic things to understand is that the total amount of taxes that are collected that help our units of government work, especially our schools. That's how they finance themselves, basically. But also our villages, our libraries, our parks, and the water that gets cleaned, the county itself. These are all different units of government that determine how much they need to function, and that is determined separately from the work that I do. So there's about $9 billion of what are called levies. This is a confusing word, but just think of it as the money that's needed every year to make government go. And then in the suburbs, it's another 10 billion. So in total in Cook County, it's $19 billion. And
Mm.
the way to think about that is the dinner bill for all of the things that we get in government every year. And the assessments that are part of this do not determine how much of that is collected. It's going to be 19 billion in Cook County, whether assessments go up or down. So what do I do? Why do we even bother with assessments? It's to divide up that dinner bill equitably amongst all of us who've been around the table. And your share of the assessed value wherever you live is your share of that dinner bill. And the key is that it be equitable. If you had a side salad and I had a porterhouse steak, the way the system's supposed to work is the guy who had the porterhouse steak is supposed to be paying more of the dinner bill. And where the system can go very wrong is if the person in my position or in other people who affect the assessed values lead to inequitable division of that dinner bill. And so you want us to be estimating the value of everyone's property fairly, equitably, without bias, without conflict of interest. The problem with that is, and what I learned from the folks that I grew up with, is that the system had been rigged, and had been rigged for decades, because people who financed the campaigns for the assessor, people who were involved in running political machines, used this office to raise money for campaigns and to give favors and preferences to some. And when you're doing that and paying for a dinner bill, everyone else pays the difference. And that is how the system got to be so broken. And that's what made me so mad that I gave up my old job, which I love, to try to fix this.
Wow.
And so just one example that can happen, Simone, is, and this happens in a lot of places, not only in Cook County, but we had a very specifically bad instance of this in Cook County when I ran, is that commercial buildings were about 40% undervalued. That's what I saw. I was trying to understand how the Merchandise Mart and Sears Tower were being valued, that had been recently purchased, but their values made no sense. They were way too low. Well, that was people who were the tax lawyers representing those buildings, getting those buildings marked too low. And then everyone else, like the people I grew up with, some of the people that we know in Oak Park and on the West Side, having to make up the difference. But also we saw examples of inequity, and it was kind of like Robin Hood in reverse for homes. The more lower valued your home was, the more modest it was, the more the system tended to overvalue it relative to the richest homes, the mansions, the luxury homes. And
Explain
again,
that.
it wasn't.
Wait, explain that a little bit. I'm not
Yeah.
following how that would work.
So there were a lot of homes up on the North Shore, downtown. In pretty much every community, the pattern was that the highest priced homes, when they sold, you could go back and look at what they were assessed for, and they'd be assessed much lower at a market value that was way below what they'd actually sell for. And what that meant is that they got to eat a porterhouse steak, but they were really paying for the side salad in their share of the burden. Meanwhile, people who lived in homes on the West Side, people who lived in modest homes, no matter where they were in the county, if they hadn't been fixed up, and since the Truman administration, oftentimes they'd be assessed too highly, and they'd be paying the same amount of the bill just like someone who owned a much more valuable home. And that's really damaging to people, because the home is probably the most important thing that people own, and it's forcing the cost of owning that home to be too high. It's a drain on your annual finances, and it probably is depressing the resale value of your house. So it's very financially consequential, affects people's generational wealth. And so what we committed to do when we came into this office is to eliminate those conflicts of interest and bias so that the system would be more fair.
Okay. So it's always been a puzzle why Cook County doesn't just give the assessment as a market value, and you have a whole nother complicated, I don't know, like, how does it work actually? How do you figure out?
Sure.
You come to my house, you ask me how many bedrooms I have, square foot, and then you come up with some other number that isn't market value. Explain a little bit about that.
Right. So it's all supposed to be anchored to market value no matter what you own, whether it's a house or a warehouse or an office building or a bowling alley. The anchor is supposed to always be market value, but market values then get converted to assessed values at different rates that actually gives preferences to homeowners, and commercial properties have to pay more than more than their share of market value than residential does. So residential assessed value is 10% of market value. Commercial and industrial is 25% of market value. So that means if you own a $100,000 home, your assessed value should be $10,000. And the commercial property would be at $25,000. So if we're all dividing up that dinner bill based on your share of assessed value, that gives a preference to homeowners. And that's something that the county board decides on and the public has decided on. The key is don't thwart the will of the public by having fake values for commercial properties to compensate for that. That decision that's made needs to be reflective of the way the law is supposed to work. So what I tell my team to do is just make sure that you're thinking about market value at all times, and you're doing your best to estimate what things are selling for, and let the law decide how that gets converted into assessed value. But yeah, that's one of the things that can be confusing. It's actually common in a lot of states to do it that way. It makes, in Cook County, a little bit better to own a home than if you live in other counties in Illinois. That's the practical effect.
Okay. So how many homes or properties to assess are there in Cook County? It has to be a
Well,
huge number.
it's 1.9 million properties,
Oh my gosh.
1.9 million parcels. So that makes it the second largest system in the US after Los Angeles. And there's about 1.5 million homes in that mix. And the homes are very different. But believe it or not, the commercial businesses are even more different. Imagine how different office buildings are, from storage warehouses to factories. They're
Yeah.
all very different.
Yeah. Wow. So what you must have a huge staff. Or how do you actually accomplish assessing? Yeah, I know you do it on a triannual basis, right? But how could you possibly like do that work? That seems like you'd have to have a huge staff.
Yeah, you need a big staff. You also need really good data, and you need good methodologies to handle it. And you need to have your finger on the pulse of markets so that you're following the market, mirroring the market, to be fair to everyone. You don't want to give a preference or be inaccurate for any different kind of property. So we have a little bit over 300 people in our office, and it's a mix of people who provide taxpayer services, interacting with the public and helping them. But the main part of our staff are the analysts, the people who have their finger on the pulse of the market and who set these values. So we have residential analysts, people who are looking at homes. We have commercial and industrial analysts who are looking at those kinds of properties. We have what we call special property analysts who are looking at particularly large properties because we want to make sure we get those numbers right. Then we have a staff that is called our field staff that's going out to do a physical census of what's out there, so that the folks who are valuing them are doing that based on accurate data. Then we have support functions. We have our outreach team, which does almost one event a year, per business day now, covering the whole county. We have a communication staff, lawyers, data scientists who are really good at using statistics and computer models to take all this data and make sense of it. And we can talk more about how we've gotten better and better at doing that. And then we also have people who do policy, who are writing laws, so that we can improve things, make this system work better for average homeowners.
Hmm. Wow. So I have to go back to your dinner analogy. I have been trying to
Uh-huh.
explain this to people for so long, and just,
Yeah.
because I've been in the world of municipal government for decades. I think that's the best way I've ever heard.
Okay. All
Because,
right. That's good.
yeah, I really do. Because I think most people think that the value of their steak, if you say you had a steak when they didn't have a steak, they think that it increases the amount they're going to pay, right? But
Right.
really,
Right.
the cost of the overall bill is fixed by people like me when I was an elected official that decide the police costs this, and we have to pave those streets and whatever all the services are. And then we tell you, the county, this is what we need. And then it's your job to decide how to divvy it up. And so one of
That's
the
right.
things, yeah, so one of the things I know, and maybe this has, I don't know if this has to do with it or not, why some of the wealthier homes are assessed lower is that people appeal their taxes, right? And when people appeal their taxes, I don't think they realize that they're asking their neighbors to take more of the share. They think they're just going to have to pay less. The government is going to get less, but the government doesn't get less. You just divide it more. Different people are on the dinner table, right? You divide it among those people. So that's another factor. But I wonder, I know this is not your job, but the concept of the board of review, um, and the five, how many people are on there that are doing
Three, yeah, three people.
three people who are supposed to look at how many cases a year? Tens of thousands of cases? How
Yeah,
does
it's
that,
it's hundreds of thousands of appeals per year at our office and at the Board of Review.
do you know
Um,
give us the skinny on that one? What really
okay,
happens?
let's delve into this. So we just did a video on my campaign side where we said when you introduce the Board of Review, this is where it gets tricky. So this is where it gets tricky. The assessor's office is doing the first draft of that share of the dinner bill. So we're taking data, we're estimating what the value of everyone's home is, what the value of all the commercial properties are. We've divided up everyone's share of that dinner bill, and you get a chance to appeal it. You could say, hey, my porterhouse steak, shouldn't be this, you shouldn't include this amount, you should include a little bit less. You can't blame people for trying to reduce their share, although people should be conscious of the fact that if you're trying to reduce your value even below what you know it to be worth, you are shifting burden onto your neighbors who have less means and less access to this. So that's an important thing to remember. But really, the duty is on the part of the government official to hold the line on fairness for everyone. But you just can't take an appeal and think about this as something in isolation. You have to think about the larger context of, is this number fair? And if I'm reducing it, what's the impact on others? Are we being less fair to everyone else by doing that? So the
Yeah.
key anchor again is, what are these things worth? What could they sell for? But we're only the first step of this whole process after we've looked at everyone's appeal, because then there's a whole other level of government. The Cook County Board of Review commissioners, there are three of them, and they can basically wipe clean the values that we've set at the assessor's office and change everything. And the pattern has been that they are making massive reductions on one kind of property while hardly changing other kinds of property. So they really don't change residential values very much, by about 1%. But their pattern in the past several years has been to reduce commercial values by closer to 20%, sometimes more than that. And that radically shifts how we're dividing up the dinner bill. And what I've been pressing for years is for the county to look at this, because I see amount of burden being shifted away from commercial properties below what I think they're worth, and having that be put on the homeowners and small businesses. And what the county's done is actually do studies of sales that have actually happened. And every time something sells, it's like a test of, okay, this property just sold for this amount of money. Let's go and look at what the assessor said it was worth and what the board of review said it was worth before it sold. And that's a test. And they looked at 1,000 sales that happened on commercial properties after the pandemic. And it showed that our values on average had been about correct. Although, sometimes there's a lot of variance there. But at the board review, they're cutting values about 25% too low some years. And that shifted the burden on to others. I think one of the big differences why that is the case is that at our office, we've eliminated that pay-to-play dynamic that I was talking about, where lawyers are funding the campaigns of the person in office. We thought it was very important to eliminate that conflict of interest when we came in office and change the tone at the assessor's office, where that pattern had normally been to give access to all these lawyers. And that's why those big mansions would get reduced so low, is because they're hiring those lawyers and they had a lot of influence. So we've been focused on transparency, eliminated that influence, thinking about the average homeowner. But the board review is kind of more like that old culture that reflects the pay-to-play culture where the lawyers reign supreme, and they really give a lot of preferences to commercial properties based on arguments that are pretty bogus, and that shifts burdens onto our homeowners, and the studies bear that out. And that's kind of the big issue in the campaign coming up this year.
Hmm. I know that from municipal development work that you almost expect those developers are going to appeal their taxes and then it's going to go way down. Sometimes municipalities will negotiate in that you can't appeal your taxes so they get the benefit of whatever partnership. Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
very frustrating in municipal government for our schools because imagine, you're administering the Oak Park School District. You're the biggest driver of our property taxes. So you have a huge interest in making sure that the system is fair. But you see a big building that's going to try appeal it. You're seeing a body of government that is going to be very favorable to cuts because they're close to the lawyers. And that's frustrating for you as someone who runs that school district because you're accountable to the public too. And no one likes property taxes. As the assessor, I don't like it. I'm sure you don't like it. But what really makes people mad is when it's seen as unfair and that their privilege is being given to big commercial buildings at their expense. And that is why, if you're a school board, you're looking at a development project, you probably do want to negotiate that, because if you see a weak point in our government where these cuts are being made, where there's a conflict of interest, that's something you need to guard against. And what we really need from our assessment officials in my office and the board review is people who are committed to eliminating conflicts of interest and being focused on valuing these things properly, eliminating biases so that the burden isn't passed on to people who are most vulnerable, and who could lose their homes and their wealth if this system is inequitable, which it has been.
Yeah. So let's go back for a second because I still am very curious about the mechanics of how three people actually do the review. How is it possible that they can take on that caseload? They subcontract it, or what do they do?
Well, so at our office, at the assessor's office, we have a team of dozens of analysts who are looking through everyone's appeal, and they're using the data that we've gathered, the models that we've used to evaluate the merit of those appeals. At the board review, you have 3 commissioners. Each has their own staff, and they're supposed to be looking at the appeals in the same context. We both have the same constitutional duty under the law to value these according to market values. But if your staff is rushed, or there's a conflict of interest, or you're accepting bogus arguments, or you're not thinking about the fairness of the overall system and you're only considering an appeal in isolation, and the person making that appeal donated to your boss's campaign and is close to them, that's where you get into trouble. That's where the system goes bad. And what I'm committed to is having put into place and using all the tools that we have at disposal, including studies, like I mentioned, including having other county leaders involved, including mobilizing school districts to make sure that these assessments on commercial properties are more fair, and commercial property owners aren't getting big cuts they don't deserve. And I think a big part of it has got to be eliminating conflict of interest in how the campaigns of all these elected officials are financed. It's a very big vulnerability. It's a blatant conflict of interest to have the person donating to your campaign in the morning and then asking for an appeal on the property in the afternoon.
Terrible. That's terrible. They should recuse themselves.
They should. And the Inspector General of Cook County has been saying for years that this is a critical vulnerability in the system and calling on assessment officials to adopt an ethics code for their body of government that forbids these kinds of donations. We took that pledge by putting in place an ethics order at our office from day one. We've always made that commitment. The board review has not done that yet. There are half of the candidates running for board review this year have made that commitment not to take those donations. So we've elevated this issue so that people are looking at it. In my own campaign, in 22, my opponent took that pledge too, that they wouldn't take those donations. And then we had, a good campaign then. But this year, my opponent is doubling down on taking donations from property tax appeals lawyers. He's taken it from more than 100 of them. They're financing his campaign. And he doesn't see anything wrong with it. And I think this is the key issue in the campaign. You know, he took a donation from the tax lawyer who got a big reduction for Trump Tower, which was not deserved, and everyone else has to pay more because of things like that.
Hmm. So your opponent has a couple of videos out that say this property is misassessed. What is, or that's what I saw. What is your response to those videos?
I'd say two things. First of all, don't take my word for it. Look at the studies that have been done on residential. The greatest experts in the world at the University of Chicago did a study in September showing that our residential assessments have been much more fair by industry standards, that we're within industry standards for the first time in my administration in the history of this office, and that we eliminated a lot of those disparities, that Robin Hood and reverse that we talked about. So don't take, and on commercial assessments, there was a county study that was done a little bit over a year ago where it showed that we were much more fair and accurate than the board review. So that's where those studies are. That's where the results are. But the second thing is take a step back. Are all these property tax appeals lawyers and big developers donating to my opponent because they think he'll be more faithful in gathering up building permits? That's not the reason. They see an opportunity to bring back pay to play where they'll win and they can get big reductions. They'll be passed on to homeowners. In terms of what he's specifically saying, he's saying that we're not gathering up enough good data about homes, or that we're not getting enough homes on the rolls, and that's a big problem with the system. What I'd say is that, do we need better data? Do we need to be gathering more information about getting homes on the rolls? Yes, but the data shows that we're doing a much better job at this than before. Because we've increased staff in the field, we're finding double the amount of properties that were off the rolls every year than our prior two administrations. And that's something that's been reported in the media. Second of all, no one should be fooled that even though we've done this, that it made a big difference to people's bills. You know, if we're finding a lot more properties and gathering better data as we have been, it's hardly visible to the average homeowner in terms of what that means for their bill. The much more consequential effect on the bill that they're paying are their inequities in commercial property values and these big reductions happening. And that's really the key question at hand. And so I think that's kind of a smokescreen to talk about, you know, do we need to have better data on homes and properties? Sure. Are we trying to do that? Yes. Are we making improvements? Yes. Could we do more? Yes. But at what cost, right? You know, we had a study done by the national experts on these sorts of things about what it would take to what would it cost to visit every single home, go inside it, take pictures.
Yeah.
It would triple our budget. It would take 10 years. Wouldn't have that much of an impact. And we don't want to go into everyone's home. And I don't think anyone wants me and my staff coming into their home. Let's focus on the biggest things.
Yeah. Yeah, that does seem the whole system is, there's so much data and there's so many homes and there's so many appeals. The whole system seems very like overburdened, or hard to understand how it actually can be.
It is. And if you try to spend all the time understanding every intricacy, it will be hard. Even the greatest experts and the greatest real estate investors don't understand some aspects of it. I think the most important thing for an average person to know is, first of all, in terms of doing this job, you want someone who's not in the tank for a certain kind of property owner, because that will come at your expense. And so you want to be looking to see, are they being equitable to everyone? Are they eliminating conflicts of interest? Whose side are they on? And we think we've shown that we've been advocates for homeowners, making the system more fair, and we've got good results on it. We're committed to pushing that forward, and we can say no to powerful interests. And I don't think you can say that about my opponent, who looks like he's in the tank to some of these interests that broke the system before. So when I talk to homeowners who are trying to navigate this system, what I tell them to do, first of all, make sure you have your homeowner's exemption. If you live in Oak Park, this is more than $1,000 off of your tax bill every year. If you're a senior, you should be applying for the senior exemption too. If you're a senior with a low income, you should apply for the freeze, which locks your assessment in place. And there are other exemptions too for people with disabilities, for veterans with disabilities. So get those. 1/3 of homeowners haven't signed up for them yet. So we're at record levels of enrollment because of the outreach we've done, but there's more work to be done to get people enrolled. So that's the first thing that every homeowner should think about. Second, in terms of advocating for yourself, make sure that you think what your property could sell for is not less than what we valued it at. If we overvalued your home based on the market value we estimated, you should be appealing, and we should try to figure out why that is. Did we get the footage right, other attributes of your house right? You can correct the record on that. And the thing that we've really focused on is you don't need a lawyer to do that. It's completely free. People who do this themselves rather than hire lawyers are actually more successful than lawyers are. You're the world's biggest expert on your own home. Our staff is trained to listen to what homeowners are telling us about the characteristics of their home so we can correct the record and make sure that that's being done right. And what I hear from homeowners is that, hey, I just want to know that my home is being assessed fairly. If it's not, that you'll listen to me. And what I really don't want is to know that other people are out there cheating the system and that I have to be drawn into this world that I don't want to be drawn into. I just want you to make sure the whole system's fair. And if that's all you can focus on, you're doing your civic duty, I think, and you can know which way to vote in this election.
Let's pivot to the topic of the actual bills and how there's certainly like this concept of hot potato about why the bills are coming out late, some kind of system, a vendor, who's in charge, what's going on, what is your role? Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So I talked about levies, all the things that go into the dinner bill. And then I talked about assessments, how we divide up the dinner bill. But I didn't finish the description for how the system works, because once we've figured out your share of the dinner bill, then the clerk, the county clerk, is basically taking all the levies and then deciding what the rates are to be applied to your assessed value. And then the treasurer is taking the clerk's rates, multiplying them by the assessed values to get to the bill, and the treasurer sends out the bill and then collects the bill and is supposed to send the money that they collect to all those people who came up with the dinner bill to begin with, our schools, our villages, and so on. So the whole system in Cook County has been operating on a computer system that dates back to the 1970s, when the Blues Brothers was in the theater, when we had disco demolition night at Comiskey Park, when I was a kid with a bowl cut and I still had hair. That's how long ago it was. And so that computer system, the county rightly decided it had to be replaced. This was 4 years before I came into office. They hired a vendor, which is a national leader in this, but they signed a contract that was very unfavorable. Simone, tell me, if you needed a new fence, would you make a deal with someone to say, who told you that, okay, if you give me all the money now, I'll build the fence at some point, but if you read the fine print, I don't have to commit to how many people I'm assigning to the job. If they don't do the job right, there's no financial consequence for me. And if the fence doesn't work, there's no financial consequence. I don't think anyone would sign that deal, but that was the deal that the county signed in 2015. Okay. We came in office in 2019. We made lemonade out of lemons, and we deployed this system in 2021 after a lot of hard work with that vendor. That was following the county's plan. But the treasurer and the clerk, the other part of the system, the folks who calculate the rates and do the bills, they had not yet gone live on this software. And the plan was they were supposed to do that last year in 24. They needed another year. They put it off to 25. And still, they could not get the system deployed and to work. And a lot of the discussion is about the treasurer complaining about the capabilities of the vendor, and the vendor has been very difficult to deal with. And the treasurer, this is very time-consuming, detail-oriented work that has to be done, looking at all this old code, making it work. And that's why bills were late this year. But the assessment piece was on time. The assessment piece, is done when the state issues this number called the multiplier. That multiplier was issued in in May, 1 week later than the year before. It made no difference for the timing of the tax bills. So why were the tax bills late? It had to do with the treasurer and the vendor's deployment of the software for them.
Yeah.
So that's what this discussion is about. But it should not, we need to know that the consequence of these late tax bills are really, really disastrous for our units of government.
Yeah.
I was just with a couple hundred school superintendents a couple weeks ago, and they're livid because they're like, we need to pay our teachers and our support staff. We need to plan our budgets, and our cash is being drained, and we're waiting. And you're sitting on this cash, and why can't we get the cash that we need to fund our budgets? And they have to pay interest to
Yeah.
borrow money to float themselves. It's very hard for a library here in Oak Park, which doesn't have the kind of cash reserves that schools might have. And it's over time, it needs to be resolved and fixed. And
Yeah.
we're as concerned as anyone else, and we really need the vendor and the treasurer to finish this work.
Yeah, I certainly hear all those angles. I know for sure that the governmental bodies are suffering. The homeowners are suffering because they get two bills in short order, which I understand there's a month extension now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So the treasurer, if everything goes okay now, the tax bills will be sent out in March and they'll be due, April 1st.
Okay. Well,
But we need to make sure that that is all ready to go and everything's in order. People have not been sent their tax refunds yet on certificates of error, and those should have been done already. So we're concerned that there are more delays in the works.
I want to ask you a question that may not be your realm, but it's a big concern that I hear. My husband is a municipal lawyer whose primary client base is south suburbs. And some
Hmm.
of the south suburbs are really going under to the extent that they're not the property values are so I'm going to say this again. Their tax bills are higher than their payments, and the impact on the homeowners is that the property values get devalued and they can't sell. And as the communities age, they become there's lack of vibrancy, there's lack of economic development, and it's really a risk. I don't know, that's not really your realm to fix, but I think there's something there about people's tax bills being so high on a rate basis on those South Side communities.
Well, Simone, you and your husband and many observers are exactly right. And um, it's true that I, as the assessor, can't fix some of the greatest inequities there, but I see them with my own eyes. And someone needs to speak up for the South Suburbs. So I work with other leaders there to push for changes so that it can be better. So here, the way I look at the suburban situation, and this is not only true in just the south suburbs. It can apply in some western suburbs, other parts of Cook County. Basically, all the distortions of our property tax system they're at their most distorted in the south suburbs. So that dinner bill in the south suburbs is put together by a bunch of minuscule levels of government in schools and villages. And their dinner bill, and so it's hard for voters to monitor what the spending decisions of all those units of government. So that's one. And there have been lots of stories about mismanagement in some of those units of government. So that's the dinner bill. But then how we're splitting up the dinner bill is very hard in the south suburbs because homes are valued so low and tax rates are so high. Tax bases are very narrow in the south. What does that mean? It means home values are low, commercial values are low, and the slightest change in those values can really change someone's share of that burden. And it can be too high for them to bear. So I'll give you an example. If you live in Harvey, Harvey has been subject to deindustrialization for several decades now. It was part of industrial America, and all the things that have gone awry in industrial America with outsourcing to China, collapsing, competitiveness of our steel industry, that really caused one part of their tax base to evaporate away. They used to have a mall. Malls have been hit really hard. Their malls closed or have real trouble functioning. And then homes in the south suburbs got hit by the housing crisis. So in the end, rates end up being very high. You have this dinner bill, the levy, a couple $100 million that has to be divided among people whose property is not worth very much, and that makes their rate high. But then, Simone, if you're someone who's building a warehouse and say it costs, $1 million to build that warehouse, if you build a warehouse in Chicago, the effective tax rate might be 7 or 8%. If you want to build that same warehouse for $100,000 or $1 million in Harvey, the rate might be 6 times what it is in Chicago. So why would you build a warehouse there? The only thing that would compel you to do that is some kind of incentive or a lower price for the land to begin with. So that pushes down the prices of properties in places like Harvey, and that makes the rates go up. And so it's like that negative feedback loop.
Death spiral.
Right. And so that makes every bias in the system even worse, because if they're tax appeals lawyers who are getting reductions on the commercial properties, people in the south suburbs really get whacked by that inequity. And we saw this happen in people's tax bills in 2024 in the south suburbs, where there were several $100 million of levies that were passed on to homeowners because of big cuts on commercial properties on buildings like warehouses for Amazon and Exxon and Walmart and data centers. And homeowners had to make up the difference, and it really, really hurt people. We don't feel that so much in Oak Park, but in the south suburbs and some of the western suburbs of Proviso, they really, really felt that. And it's made even worse. And we haven't even talked about TIFs. TIFs can make it worse because in some villages, everything's in a TIF. I don't know if you've talked about TIFs on this show, Simone. It's a tax increment financing district.
Congress is not I've been doing Congress, so yeah.
Yeah.
TIFs. Yeah, we could talk a lot about TIFs, but I don't want to wear everybody out. But yeah.
Right.
It's one of those catch-22s, because in order to attract that warehouse or any kind of a tax producing entity, you need some kind of an incentive, and where are you going to get the money from an incentive?
Right. And so I know a lot of hardworking mayors in the south suburbs, and they really want to get that Amazon warehouse, or they really want to get that casino or hotel. But then the people who have these investments can play off villages against each other. It becomes a race to the bottom to give them the most benefits. And if you use a TIF, basically says that, look, we're going to keep assessments locked in place in this area, and then any increase in value is going to not be for the benefit of all the taxpayers, but instead we'll be collecting money to reinvest inside this area. Well, that means if you have a hotel built in a community, it's not helping to spread the tax base and lower rates for people. It's not helping them at all, except for maybe 20 years down the road. And so that is where the tension is in a lot of these villages. But I understand why mayors will work really hard and give lots of incentives and benefits just to get a chance to have that investment that can bring some jobs to their community.
Yeah. And also, I hear the collection rate is like half of the people.
Well, right. Because if the bills are impossible, like imagine you lived in Harvey, you own a home there, it's only worth $100,000, but your tax bill is still extraordinarily high. You still got to pay $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 on that $100,000 home. And if there's a shift, maybe you had $1,000 increase in your bill, and that can force you out of your home very easily. And how do you get forced out of your home? You can't pay your bill. If you look at it from Harvey's point of view, they're not collecting their taxes. The mayor of Harvey just died,
I heard that.
Christopher Clark, and I knew him, and he talked about how hard it was. They were only collecting 56% of the taxes that had been billed. And he noticed that some of the corporate owners were paying taxes elsewhere in Cook County, but thought they could get away with not paying them in Harvey, and it made him really mad. And I fear that was one of the things that shortened his life.
Really? Well, that's terrible. That,
It is because think about it. Whose fault is that in Harvey? What did anyone in Harvey who's a homeowner deserve to be put in a situation like that?
yeah,
And a mayor who's trying to lead his community and make it better off. What did he do to deserve that situation? It
yeah.
is very, it's an incredible injustice. So how do we fix that? I mean, the first thing is reforming how we finance schools, because our state in Illinois does less to support school budgets than pretty much any other state in the union. It's getting a little better every year, but uh, about 25% to a third of school budgets in Illinois are covered by the state. School districts have to make up the rest through property taxes. In other states like Indiana, about half of budgets are covered by the state or the county. And that means they have lower property taxes. And when I think about a place like Harvey, I think that if the state was covering more of the cost of educating their kids, property taxes would come down, and other kinds of activities that are, support school budgets would be covering that instead. And, we're in this world where we used to do a lot of things in hotels and in meetings, but here we are on Zoom instead, right?
Yeah.
So the things that used to generate revenue for hotels are now being, earned by Zoom. Zoom is somehow making money on this. Are they helping to foot the cost of our schools? Doubt it. But in Indiana, they are, because they have to pay income taxes at the county and state there that help to foot the cost of schools. So we need to think about things like this so that it's not so inequitable to communities like Harvey.
Yeah, I think that we're in obviously such a shifting time of technology, of AI, of the economics of kids getting out of school and not being able to get jobs. And there's so much change going on that every system really needs to be revisited to see if it's still functioning.
Yes, and this is why I do this job. I don't do the job because you get automatic glorification. We don't expect adulation for the work that we're doing. But when I was looking at all the different ways that the system was broken, and I did see that there are solutions out there, I said, these solutions are not going to be easy, but someone's got to step up and think about this and do this and focus in on that. And that's socially useful. It's worthwhile. I want to do that. It's what I've dedicated my life to, and I want to keep doing it for another 4 years because we got a great team that's plugging away on these inequities.
Great. Fritz Kaegi, it's been my pleasure to interview you today.
All right, thanks, Simone. Really appreciate everyone out there. Look us up at fritzforassessor.com. Thanks.
All right.